The first pod hit the roof of Tower 6 at 03:47 in the morning, and Dex was already awake. He had been awake for 2 hours, sitting on the water tank platform above his flat with a pair of signal relay goggles pushed up on his forehead and a half-eaten flatbread going cold in his hand. The goggles had been salvaged from the Caldren Estate maintenance depot. Technically, they belonged to the Building Management Authority, but the Management Authority had not sent anyone to the estate in 11 months, so Dex considered them transferred. He had been using them to watch the northern sky, where a cluster of objects had been descending on a controlled trajectory for the past 40 minutes. He had pinged the other 6. By the time the pod hit Tower 6, they were all awake. By the time the secondary pods hit Tower 3 and the generator block on the eastern edge, all 7 of them were moving. The Caldren Estate was a residential complex on the eastern margin of the city, 14 towers in a rough oval, connected by elevated walkways and a shared lower courtyard that had once been a car park and was now a community garden. It was not a prestigious address. It had 2 working elevators across the entire complex, a relay antenna that needed rebooting every 3rd morning, and a reputation in the city's housing authority files as an area of persistent low-level maintenance debt. What the housing authority files did not contain was any record of the infrastructure that the Caldren Estate's 4,200 residents had built into the towers over the past 30 years. Dex knew about the infrastructure. He had grown up inside it. His grandmother had been one of the engineers who designed it, back when the Planetary Defense Council began the City Grid Integration Program. She had been 16 then, young for an apprentice structural modeler, and she had poured 30 years of her working life into turning the Caldren Estate's mundane building stock into something the housing authority would never look at twice. The relay antenna that needed rebooting every 3rd morning needed rebooting, because it had a secondary function that drew heavily on the building's power reserves. The water tank platforms on the tower roofs had load-bearing specifications far exceeding the requirements for water storage. The courtyard community garden sat on top of a reinforced basement level that the city plans listed as disused. Dex had learned all of this from his grandmother when he was 11, sitting in the disused basement while she walked him through the schematics on a battered fold-out screen. He had taken notes in a small green notebook that he still carried in his jacket pocket. 5 years later, the notebook was full, and he had started a second one. The pods were Rvekkan. He recognized the shape from the identification tables his grandmother had made him memorize. Outlaw configuration, no planetary authority markings, hull plating pocked and mismatched, descent burn patterns irregular. The Rvekkan Outlaw bands had been operating in the outer transit lanes for decades, picking over abandoned infrastructure and selling salvage to whoever would buy it. They came in fast, grabbed what they could carry, and left before a response could mobilize. That was their model. Dex had spent a long time thinking about what they might want from the Caldren Estate. The answer was the relay infrastructure, specifically the secondary antenna systems, which would read on any Rvekkan scanner as high-value communications hardware. Strip the towers, load the components, be gone before the city defense grid could redirect a response unit to a residential block on the eastern margin. It was a sound plan. It would have worked on most estates. He hit the first call key on his wrist relay. Yemi status. Yemi's voice came back immediately. She was 14, the youngest of the 7, and she had a habit of sounding completely calm in situations that warranted the opposite. Tower 3 roof. I count 2 pods, Rvekkan. 6 occupants each, 12 coming in here. They've got cutting gear already out, going for the antenna housing. Let them start, Dex said. Don't move until I say. I know, Dex. He hit the second key. Priya. Generator block, Priya said. She was 15, the best climber among them, and she had positioned herself on the generator block's exterior ladder before any pod touched down. One pod, 4 occupants. They're confused. The housing says generator block, but the block's got nothing worth taking on the outside. They're looking for the access panel. The panel's behind the false wall, Dex said. I know where the panel is, Dex. He hit the third key, Rollo. Rollo was 17, a year older than Dex, and he responded from the Tower 6 roof with a flat tone that meant he was watching something he found professionally interesting. 6 up here. They hit the landing hard, one of them's limping. They've got a signal jammer running, standard frequency civilian model. Our relay's already rerouted to the secondary band. Dex was moving along the enclosed walkway between Tower 4 and Tower 5. Its interior walls were lined with junction boxes that the official plans listed as decommissioned electrical switching equipment. His grandmother had never seen any reason to update the plans. Marco. Sully, talk to me. Marco was 16, Dex's age, and ran the courtyard. Basement access locked. They haven't found the courtyard entry point yet. I've got eyes on 2 Rvekkan at the south walkway doing a perimeter walk, probably scouting for a command spot. Sully came in half a second later. She was 15, and her position was the relay room on Tower 8's 4th floor, the building's nerve center, to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Secondary antenna is rerouted and broadcasting on the grid frequency. City defense grid has our signal. Response time on a residential block this far east without a declared emergency priority. A brief pause. 35 minutes minimum. We won't need 35 minutes, Dex said. I know, Sully said. I just like to know the number. 7th, Dex said, addressing the last member of the crew by the nickname everyone used because his actual name, Bartholomew Oakstrand, took too long to say in the dark. You're on the courtyard exit. Been on it, the 7th said. He was 16, tall enough that the walkway joints required a slight duck, and he had a particular gift for being motionless in locations where people weren't looking. The 2 perimeter walkers are about to find the courtyard entrance. Should I let them in? Dex thought for 3 seconds. The Rvekkan Outlaw model required speed. They would not have sent more than 3 pods to a residential block. 22 operatives, possibly 23 if the limping one recovered. All of them currently spread across 4 entry points, none aware of each other's exact positions, none running communications that could cut through the rerouted relay. Let them in, he said. Let all of them in. The next 12 minutes were very busy. The Rvekkan crew on Tower 3's roof discovered, midway through cutting the primary antenna housing, that the housing was attached to a secondary structural frame that locked rigid the moment any cutting tool met the mounting bolts. They could not cut through it and could not walk away. The locking mechanism had engaged magnetic clamps that held the cutting equipment against the frame as firmly as if welded there. Yemi, watching from a maintenance hatch 3 meters away, said nothing. She was good at being quiet. The crew on the generator block found the access panel and got it open, revealing a second panel behind it. The second panel accepted only a building authority biometric key. Priya, on the ladder outside, pressed the exterior reset switch her grandmother's notes described as a fire exit override, and the second panel sealed itself and took the first with it, both locked into a housing that could only be opened from inside the building. The 4 Rvekkan looked at the wall. Then they started looking for another way in. Priya let them find the service corridor entrance. The corridor's lights triggered slightly after a person entered rather than at the threshold, illuminating a passage that ended in a sealed door before cutting out. That sealed door was not the only door in the corridor, but the other was flush with the wall and opened inward, invisible unless you were standing close enough to feel the seam with your fingers. The 7th opened the courtyard entrance for the 2 perimeter walkers and stood aside. They walked in without looking behind them. He closed the entrance, engaged the secondary lock, and pinged Dex. 2 in, courtyard sealed. The 6 operatives on Tower 6's roof had spent 8 minutes trying to understand why their signal jammer was not suppressing the estate's relay antenna. The jammer was working, output correct, frequencies right, but the antenna kept broadcasting. Rollo waited until all 6 had gathered around the jammer's control unit, comparing readings, before he tripped the platform access door. It was spring-loaded and opened outward. A sharp crack that brought all 6 Rvekkan to full alert, weapons raised, pointed at the door. The door opened onto an empty maintenance space. While they were looking at it, the platform's perimeter railings engaged a secondary locking function Dex's grandmother had described in the notebook as crowd management option, emergency use. The railings moved 3 centimeters outward from their brackets and locked now barriers, continuous, with the sections facing the roof's only stairwell access keyed to Dex's relay. Rollo's voice came through the earpiece. Containment on Tower 6. Dex was at ground level by then, standing in the dark between the community garden's raised beds. The courtyard was enclosed on all sides by tower facades and walkway structures, its 4 ground-level entrances locked by the secondary systems Marco had engaged when the perimeter walk began. The 2 Rvekkan in the garden center had their weapons raised and were turning slowly, scanning. They had not found anything. The courtyard's overhead lighting was on a manual switch that only worked from the relay room on Tower 8's 4th floor. Suli's voice came through his earpiece. "Ready when you are." Dex walked to the center of the courtyard. He was 16, medium height, goggles still pushed up on his forehead, green notebook in his jacket pocket, flour on his left hand from the flatbread he had forgotten he was holding. He stopped 4 meters from the 2 Rvekkan. "Before Suli turns the lights on," he said, in a normal conversational tone, "you should know that your crew on Tower 3 is locked against the antenna housing. Your crew on Tower 6 is contained on the roof. Your crew in the generator corridor is stuck between 2 sealed panels, and you 2 are in a locked courtyard. Your signal jammer isn't suppressing our relay because our relay is running on the secondary band, which means the city defense grid received our status report about 20 minutes ago." He paused. "The grid response unit is probably 20 minutes out, which is fine. But I thought you'd want to know where things stand before the lights come on." There was a long silence. One of the Rvekkan, the taller one, with the command insignia on the collar of his exosuit, said something in the Outlaw trade band dialect that Dex's grandmother had also made him learn. "That's a reasonable question," Dex said. "We live here." Suli turned the lights on. The courtyard was bright and still. The raised beds were neatly maintained, winter greens in the northern section, climbing plants on the eastern trellis, a small water feature recycling through the foundation drainage. The towers stood solid and plain around the edge, their windows dark, their walkways empty. It looked exactly like what it was, a residential estate, well kept, unremarkable. The Rvekkan commander looked at the towers. He looked at the courtyard. He looked at Dex. Dex waited. The commander's weapon came down slowly. His second did the same. "The rest of your crew," Dex said. The commander spoke again in the trade dialect. "Tell them to stand down," Dex said. "I'll tell the relay room to give them the unlock codes for the antenna housing and the roof railings once your people confirm they've put the cutting equipment down. Generator corridor crew can wait for the response unit. The corridor's climate-controlled. They'll be fine." Rollo's voice. "Tower 6 crew have put their equipment on the deck." "Yemi, Tower 3 crew have stepped back from the housing." The Rvekkan commander looked at Dex for another moment. He was, Dex estimated, at least 30 years old, roughly double Dex's age, with the kind of face that suggested considerable experience of things going wrong in the dark. He appeared to be working through the mathematics of the situation. Then he sat down on the edge of the nearest garden bed, set his weapon on the flagstones, and said, in accented but recognizable standard, How long? Has this been here? Dex said. The system. 30 years, give or take. The housing authority. Has maintenance debt on 2 elevators and a relay antenna, Dex said. We know. We filed those reports ourselves. Marco's voice in the earpiece. Defense Grid Response Unit is inbound. 12 minutes. Dex pulled the green notebook from his pocket. On the inside back cover, his grandmother had written a single line in her neat block letters, back when she had first explained the system to him. The block takes care of the block. He had read that line so many times the ink had faded slightly at the edges. He looked at the Rvekkan commander sitting in the community garden at 4 in the morning, surrounded by winter greens and the quiet certainty of a place that had been ready for exactly this for 3 decades. You picked the wrong estate, Dex said. The commander, to his credit, laughed. It was a short, rueful sound. Yes, he said, we did. The Defense Grid Response Unit landed in the courtyard 17 minutes later. The unit commander, a young lieutenant with the kind of crisp uniform that suggested recent promotion, walked in to find 22 Rvekkan operatives sitting in a row along the garden beds with their weapons stacked in a neat pile by the water feature, and 7 teenagers standing around them with the calm, unhurried air of people who had already done everything that needed doing. The lieutenant looked at Dex. You held this complex with 7 people. Dex thought about the 30 years of careful work his grandmother and her colleagues had poured into the tower frames, and the rerouted relay bands, and the locking railings, and the invisible corridor doors. He thought about the green notebook and the fold-out screen in the basement, and the hours of memorizing identification tables that he had thought, at 11, were probably excessive. The block held itself, he said. We just knew where the switches were.